Welcome everyone again. For those of you just joining, we're now talking to Jethro Prinston from Generon. And the other question I had for you was, oh, and big shout out to people coming in from Winnipeg and University of Montreal and Massachusetts. Thanks for joining. Mohammed, I see you on screen. Just to let you know, you're being recorded. So this will be on YouTube later on. So if you want to be on there, that's fine, but just letting you know. Okay.
That's good. Thank you very much.
Okay, no worries. So yes, the other question I had for Jethro is, what was part of your decision in joining Generon? How did you decide on joining Generon?
Right, yeah. So this goes back to, I guess, the reason why I came to grad school in the first place, right? So I took a medicinal chemistry course in undergrad, and my professor who worked in the industry before teaching actually will tell us a bunch of stories about his experience, and it sounded very exciting. He will tell us about, you know, all the stuff that's going on in industry before an FDA drug approval, and how like a drug would affect, you know, like a bunch of people's lives and stuff like that. So the idea that I could use my biochemistry knowledge and help develop products that actually have impact on people's lives was very exciting to me. So Generon so the idea of me joining industry was before I started grad school. So Generon specifically, why Generon specifically? So my background is mostly in structural biology, which is mostly specifically protein biochemistry, protein science, protein structure, protein biochemistry. And as I mentioned before, a lot of most of all of the therapies that Generon produce are protein therapies. Most of them are actually antibody therapies, which are proteins. So obviously my background would be very useful to a company like that. Another maybe big reason is that Generon is not exactly like a lot of other pharma companies, which are I guess run by business or finance or even engineers, right? Like the CEO of the company is a scientist. He has a PhD, and it's him with the CSO, and you can tell how important science is to the company, since like all of the products that Generon produces were basically homegrown, right? They were not like bought by, you know, from a smaller company and then rebranded or whatever. So if you look at Generon's pipeline and current products, they're all drugs that are either were developed or are being developed at Generon. So this aspect of innovation and you know, using science to make medicine is very interesting to me. So that was part of the reason as well. Also, it's in New York City. It's close to New York City, which is cool.
Nice. And Jethro, before people came on, he was telling me about, you know, living there. So what's it like living there right now and under the certain circumstances? How is New York City?
Yeah. So I haven't really I don't know, visited New York City since I've been here. Like I've been to New York City multiple times before. So I know the city fairly well. Like I don't feel like a tourist really. But since I've been there, I haven't gone out. I haven't gone to a restaurant or anything. So it's weird to say how it is. But I mean, I guess the only time I've gone, I just went to walk around. It seems fine. Obviously, it's not as busy as New York City is usually, because most people who can work at home are working from home. But one thing for me specifically is that I don't actually work in the city. Generon is actually located in Tarrytown, which is a town north of New York City, which is like a 20-30 minute drive from New York City. So I live in New York City, but I work in Tarrytown. So I commute to Tarrytown in the morning. So I don't really feel like I'm in New York City a lot of the time, unless it's on a weekend and I go, you know, into the city and, you know, do stuff. But I haven't done that much. So,
Right.
but yeah, it's fine. It's not I know New York City was actually an epicenter for COVID, for COVID-19. So I guess like 6 months ago, it would have been pretty hard to move around. But now the number of new cases are relatively low compared to other states of the same size. So it doesn't feel that different from Toronto, which I was where I was living like 2 months ago.
Mm. So then in the lab, what's it like working in the lab right now? What are the precautions like? What do you do?
Yeah. Obviously, there are precautions. A lot of the people who can work from home do work from home, but I think we have a max. We definitely have a max capacity. I don't know exactly what it is, but I think it's less than 50%. And so yeah, so because of that, it's interesting because there's a lot of people that I've interacted with, like by email or through meetings online, but I haven't seen in person because they haven't been on campus since they don't have to. But I don't think it's that different. It's just a smaller capacity. Capacity. Yeah.
Okay. And then if I think people are interested in what was your job application process like? So did you apply to a ton of jobs? Were you very specific and applied to a little bit? When you were about to finish your master's or grad degree, how did you go about that whole process?
Right. Yeah, I actually started seriously applying to jobs, I would say in April, which is, I guess, a couple of months before I actually got this position. So seriously, meaning I would apply, to a lot of the biochemistry jobs that I qualified for. So I initially started by using Indeed, but I found it a little too broad. So I actually ended up using more Biospace and LinkedIn because they would have more specific positions that I thought were applying to me more specifically. So yeah, so I definitely applied to a lot of positions, but only to like biochemistry positions that I qualify for, not like any science position. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then I'm just going to go to the chat here because you have some questions. Question from Nolene: is your job interdisciplinary or is it primarily wet bench experiment based?
Yeah. So I don't think interdisciplinary and bench baits are mutually exclusive because it is primarily bench based, right? So a lot of my work is going to be in the lab, but I will be doing quite a bit of like structural studies. So like I mentioned, circular dichroism, fluorescence spectroscopy, FTIR, stuff like that. But I will also be learning different experiment techniques like stability techniques and basically, yeah, to look at different aspects of a protein. But based on that, it is kind of interdisciplinary because I'm looking at both the structure of the protein, for example, but also the stability of protein. But yeah, there's a lot of analyses that comes from it as well. So yeah, I don't know if I answered that question. But yeah.
So I guess how big is Generon? Do you have is it a big team?
Yeah, so Generon, I think they have they have at least 8,000 employees. And so I don't know if that's big or small. I wouldn't say it's not small.
It's not small.
I would say it's not small. Yeah, but I don't know if it's big. But there is the main campus, which is where I work. This is where a lot of the pretty confident all of the R&D is done. There's a smaller campus that does mostly administrative stuff, but but the main campus is where I am, is where they do a lot of the development and research. Yeah.
So the question was, and it's also related to the question of COVID. So, Mohammed asks, how difficult was it to get a U.S. industry, or just how difficult to get into U.S. industry jobs during this COVID-19 crisis? And let's break that down into two parts. Let's get Jethro's take on it first, and I can talk to the general aspect of it all. So to Jethro would be, how was your job search process affected by COVID? And then I can address the bigger picture. So let's look at Jethro's experience first.
Sure.
How did COVID affect your job search process, if at all?
Yeah. I would say that the biotech / pharma industry is one of the few areas of the job market that was either not significantly affected or actually benefited from the COVID-19 situation. Like a lot of companies were racing to develop treatments, vaccines, and so on, and there were a lot of government contracts given to companies that basically made forced the company to hire more employees, right? So I would imagine that I don't know exactly how it affected it, but I would imagine it would be less severe than, say, someone who works in business consulting, for example, right? So
yeah.
But at least for me specifically, I don't know. I guess one way for sure it affected it was that everything was done through phone or video calls, right? Whereas before COVID-19, I would have to come to campus to give a presentation. But because of COVID-19, I had to give a presentation through Zoom, and I had like a full day interview through Zoom, right? So that's definite. That is definite way that it affected it. But in terms of job availability, I don't know if it had a huge impact, at least in the biotech pharma industry.
Yeah, and just to jump on that, so I was at a conference a month ago, higher ed conference, and we were talking about the jobs that are affected by COVID. And just to back up Jethro here, the biotech sector, not much. And it's probably increased just the way Jethro has talked about. If you are in virology, infectious disease, epidemiology, all those fields, you're high in demand. Now, what has been affected on some campuses are academic positions, unfortunately, because less students they're deferring. There's not enough tuition, right? So some universities, especially in the United States right now, I would say we're at about 400 to 500, have put a freezing on hiring of anybody new. So that's the only one unfortunate side effect of all this is academia. And so, there are positions still out there, but some universities have put a hiring freeze this year. It's probably going to get better next year, but right now that's where it's hurting is in academia. So just kind of segueing from that question, what was the interview process like? You said it was all through virtual. What did you have to do specifically for Generon? What did you have to do?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, there was about 3 parts in the process. So after applying, I received an email from a recruiter from Generon asking if I would be interested in a phone interview. After that, so I talked to him on the phone for like 30 minutes. He seemed very nice. And then I talked to a hiring manager, the hiring manager that I actually currently work with. So on the phone, I talked to her and someone on her team. I think it was either a phone or I think it was a Skype interview, but like no cameras were on, so it felt like a phone interview. So yeah, I think that was that. And then after that, I think I received an invitation for a full day interview. So that one was like an 8-hour long interview where I met with like everyone from well, not everyone, but a lot of people from the protein biochemistry team, everyone in the team that I'm currently in, but also various people like the associate director of the team, the various directors of the team, other scientists on the team. So yeah, that was a pretty long interview. I also had to give a 40-minute presentation. I chose to give it on my master's project. so that was so. So after that, I think I waited about a week or two. Actually, at least 2 weeks for an offer, and then that was that.
And then, so they gave you an offer and then you started, and the first time you met them face to face was when you started the job. Is that right?
Yeah. So obviously I saw a lot of them during the full day interview, because during that interview, people actually turned on their cameras. But I didn't meet any of them until I didn't meet anyone until 2 weeks after I got hired, when I went to campus, because everything was done through Zoom and video calls and phone calls and so on. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention was thanks to Nana Lee. She actually helped me with the interview process. I guess before the interviews, I had meetings with Nana, and she I don't know, kind of helped me prepare better. I also
Mock interviews.
Yes, mock interviews. Right. I also met with the peers communication team. So they're a group in biochemistry that they're available for you to present to. So I had to make my 40-minute presentation and give it to them, and then they had their own feedback, and I updated my presentation from their feedback. So I think they helped a lot. So I just wanted to mention that in there.
Yeah. So that's kind of a segue to the next question is, you mentioned you had to give a talk, and that was part of your interview process.
That's correct.
So I would imagine that, those communication skills that you built during graduate school was critical, right? It was critical during the interview process. And this goes back to actually Tao. I think you know Tao Wang.
Yes.
From
Yes.
Tao,
Yes.
do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? It's kind of related to what we're talking about.
Oh yeah, for sure. So
What's up, Tom?
hey Jethro, hope you're doing well.
Yeah, same.
So this is just because I know there are a few undergrad students in this call as well. I thought I'd just ask a general broad question. So on top of having a relevant educational background, what sorts of steps or skills did you have to pick up that once you either decided on your goal of going to Generon, or maybe when you're starting to think about applying for these, what sorts of steps or skills did you think about for that? And then kind of tied into that, would you give any advice to any folks that might be in different stages of their careers, whether they're in undergrad, whether they're in grad school right now, whether they're in postdocs, etc.?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so different steps, right? So obviously having your project be on protein structure helps a lot when you're joining a protein biochemistry group. But also I think my background and my experience in various groups and student groups that helped me, I guess, improve my communication helped a lot. So like Tao, I work with Tao, who were both Dons at New College. And I think that was one of the examples of experiences that helped me improve in terms of how to communicate and how to organize events and how to meet with people and how to work in a group and so on. So I think those experiences definitely helped. I mean, I was part of the LSCDS. I would imagine you've heard of that. I was part of the BGSU. I was a student tutor for high school students on Saturday program. So I think all of these helped in terms of communicating and working with other people. And in terms of advice, so obviously I would say, if you're an undergrad, you should try and do a co-op at a place that you would like to work at. So that would definitely help in terms of you having experience, but also really understanding whether or not you like it, right? Because if you do a co-op, that's a year, and if you like it, then you know that you like it, then you can go on and do a master's, get a PhD or whatever. And if you don't, then you also know earlier. But also, I mean, I would imagine a co-op is pretty competitive. So if that's too competitive, you can also join student groups these are great in terms of learning how to work with other people, working in a team, communicate, and so on. So yeah, there's plenty of options out there. So yeah, good question, Tom.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I always talk about in my courses, I talk about you go to school. If you go to school, you do it, what you're expected, you hand in your assignments, you do the exam, you get your A. Now compare that to somebody that is now engaged with a professor, goes to office hours, asks pertinent, genuine questions about protein structure or whatever you're interested in, and you're meeting with people now, or you're working on a project with people. That's an engagement. That's an experience, what I call meaningful engagement, that really makes a difference between the person that just, got their A and then got their A, but now they have a meaningful experience. Not to say you need straight A's, right? You just need to pass to get a job. But, it's having that meaningful experience that Jethro was talking about, whether it's through co-ops or internships or job shadowing or research or extracurriculars that really shape you. Like Jethro, he did a whole bunch of other stuff that helped with people skills, right? He was Dawn, he was part of all these different extracurriculars. And that was really an instrumental piece, I think, when he was interviewing. So good for Jethro. That's why he's on this talk show. So I guess this kind of builds on that question is, what are the experience and skills or these meaningful engagements we talked about that you built during graduate school that you're still building on in your current role? And so you talked about teamwork. Obviously, there's teamwork now. And are there any other skills that you're even building now as you through your career?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, I would say teamwork. One thing I wanted to say is that it is surprising how similar it is to grad school. Like even the lab layout is the same, like the office layout the same, the building looks the same to me. All the instruments are the same, piping, everything's very, very similar. The people, act the same. So that's nice, I guess. So in that sense, I don't have to really adjust how I behave or the way I would act from grad school. So on the technical side, so my entire project, for example, was key, I would say, to this position. Like I mentioned before, it was specifically on protein structure and stability. So I had quite a bit of experience with the techniques that they were looking for example, like CD, fluorescence, stability studies, and so on. The thing is, I'm not really sure how much of the non-technical experience contributing to my hiring, but I would imagine that it did help. But I would imagine that my supervisor saw my leadership experience as the co-lead of the LSCDS mentorship team, a residence done at New College, and so on. And I would imagine that helped. And right now, I would say that it definitely helps in terms of just meeting everyone else and discussing what they do and learning from everyone. So yeah.
Do you have mentors there right now? Do they set you up with mentors, or is it up to you to kind of find them? How does that work there right now?
Yeah, I would say my supervisor currently is my mentor, but I also have someone that I work with closely. They kind of have like a buddy system. So he's basically in the same role that I am, but obviously he has more experience. So he's basically teaching me a lot of their way of running an experiment, so stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah, mentors are huge for everybody. You should have a mentor outside of your supervisor and your supervisory committee. Mentors are huge. And I want to take this moment to describe the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, right? So a mentor is someone that mentors your skills, the way you run your experiments, or even your career development. And if you ask them, then they'll write a positive recommendation letter for you, hopefully. Now, a sponsor is somebody that will speak on your behalf even when you're not there. So let's say I'm at a conference and somebody's looking for, a new grad in biochemistry, and they want somebody who's had some great people skills, right? And that's when I'll say, oh, I'll send you Jethro. right? So that's the kind of, everyone needs to have one or two sponsors, like somebody that will speak on your behalf when you're not there. So those are the two differences that I want to clarify there. Joanna has a question. Joanna, do you want to turn your microphone on, or do you want me to read it out?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to have my microphone on. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm a postdoc, so I'm coming at this from having been in academia longer, but I'm curious about just the experience of shifting to the time frame of industry, because, you know, we just had a paper accepted this week that we first submitted it to publication in March, and then we tried a bunch of journals, and it's finally been accepted. We got the data back in 2018. So as far as I know, projects move faster in industry, and that's one of the things that really appeals to me about it. But at the same time, I'm used to working in this really slow time frame. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about that adjustment.
Yeah, for sure. Experiments are definitely faster because there's, I don't want to say there's virtually unlimited resources, but let's just say there's a lot more resources available to you in industry. So you can do a lot more in the same time scale. But the thing is, I've only been here for a month, so I don't know exactly how much faster it is. But I can't really say, you know, comparing to academia. But I would say that it is definitely faster in terms of running experiments. But the thing is, at least in academia, your experiments, you're trying to publish academic papers, whereas here you're trying to get data to send to the FDA for approval of a drug. So it's a kind of different goal, but I would say, yeah, the experiments are definitely faster here.
Yeah, so I'll speak a little bit to that because I spent a few years in the biotech industry myself, and it is faster. It's almost, when I came back to academia, I had to get used to the shift in speed again. But for example, when I was in the startups, we'd have an idea at 9 a.m., talk to the CEO at 11, and then by 2 o'clock, we'd have it implemented for our clients, right? So it's really fast. And that is in a smaller biotech setting, of course. And we were in the business of providing optimal experience or product or consultations to our clients. It's very client driven. Obviously, you have funding, you have grants and whatnot. Papers are something that are published, but it's after the patent comes out, right? Because once you release your intellectual property, now it's out there. So usually most companies, it's all about creating that product, creating that consultation or that special project with a big pharma or biotech, and then working with the clients on a project that's making an impact for the end user, whether that's the patient or healthcare provider or another company. So it is faster, and it's just driven by a different mechanism. It's less kind of paper driven, although papers are a big part of it as well for some companies, but it's more, let's do something real world kind of thing. If that makes sense. The question you got was, did you negotiate your salary? You don't have to answer that. Or did you negotiate at all, or did you just sign the dotted line?
Yeah. I guess I don't know. I guess I won't answer that question. I don't know.
Okay. That's fine. You don't have to answer that question. But I'll just address it in sort of a general way. It's not, when people get their job or get that letter of offer, they think that the first thing they want to negotiate is their salary. It's just like the number one thing that, especially students or postdocs that are coming straight out of academia, as they just look at the salary. But there are other things that you can negotiate that are just as meaningful, right? So for example, let's say you're working for a nonprofit research organization, and they say, well, we can't give you as much salary as we thought we could, but here's our offer. So then maybe you might turn around and say, well, then could I have maybe one more week of vacation? So as a company would, it's better for them to give an employee an extra week of vacation than trying to come up with another 10 grand or whatever it is for the week, right? So there's vacation pay, I mean, vacation time, there's benefits, medical benefits. Are they giving you dental coverage, prescription, like all these things? Do they have on-site daycare if you have a family? Do they provide intellectual freedom? Are you allowed to go write a paper with your supervisor that you've worked with? These are all things that are all negotiable, that are outside of the salary thing. So when they give you a letter of offer, it shouldn't just be all about salary. Okay. So Kathleen has a question. Kathleen, you want to turn your mic, or should I just fire away?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I was just really curious as to how your work dynamic is like, and also just in general, how are you enjoying it out there in New York?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so far everyone's been very welcoming. Like I mentioned before, it literally feels like grad school is the same, like sort of like environment. So like I'm very used to like the, I don't know, it seems to me, it feels like I knew a lot of these people, even though I haven't. So that's cool. Everyone's nice, everyone's willing to help whenever I ask questions. I haven't had any issues so far. My team is pretty nice. We have a pretty nice team. So yeah, so far so good. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. So I think, Joanna's made a comment on how big a difference that resources make. She said an undergrad once asked me why they were doing PCR when it seemed like a robot could do it, and I had some bad news for her. Yeah. Jay Moon, and Jay is from UMass Medical. Yes, welcome. Do you want to ask your question?
Sure. So I'm just curious, like, what types of questions you asked during your interview? And then, I know you said you had like an 8-hour-long interview day, and that's a lot of time. And I'm just wondering, like, is there anything that you had wished you had asked that you know now, and then that would have helped you kind of better understand the role? Things like that.
Yeah. That's a good question. I don't remember exactly what I asked, but I asked a lot of questions. I asked questions to everyone. I had 8 hours, right? So, and I was meeting with different people, different groups. So I met with the director, I met with the associate director of the group. I met with my supervisor individually. I met with people in the group by themselves without the supervisor present, so I could ask them questions. Yeah, I think I asked pretty much the normal questions. How is it like? How do you work? How do you like working with your supervisor? What don't you like about working out with Generon or with your supervisor? Stuff like that. And all the answers seem reasonable. So I don't remember anything that sounded alarming or concerning. Even now, there isn't anything that I think, oh yeah, I should have gone about this before. Well, I guess except that it's hard to get to where I work from where I live, but that's just my fault because I choose to live in New York City. But even that's not really true, because the company has they offer like a shuttle bus, which makes it easier. So now it's pretty easy for me to get to where I work. But anyways, yeah. So my point is, I don't see anything yet that I would have wished, like I wish I knew like before that I didn't ask for, So I think maybe I had good questions and they answered honestly, and everything they said matched to what I've seen, or so far it's been fine, and they're hiding everything, and we'll see in a year. So yeah. But yeah, so far so good.
Yeah, so kind of building on that, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really know. That's a hard question. I just started. I can see myself growing within the company. I would definitely like to have more responsibility. Even manage a small team of my own. That'd be great. But who knows? No one can predict the future. So I don't know.
So perhaps you stay in science. I think you'll stay in science. I think you like science.
I do like science. I like I like saying that I'm a scientist, or I like saying that I'm a biochemist. So yeah, but you know,
Jethro, the scientist, it has a good ring to it.
it does, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think the question that pops up time and time again in this kind of situation is, the difference between having a master's and a PhD and a postdoc
Right.
in the industry setting. So
Right.
in your kind of experience, and I'll touch on that as well, can you explain to everybody kind of your role versus someone that just came in with a PhD and someone with a postdoc?
Right. Yeah. So I guess that goes back to the question from before. So I would imagine that someone would appear, okay, so from my experience, from what I can tell, it seems to me that if you have a PhD and you have one or 2 years of one, 2 or more years of postdoc, I would imagine that you would do more of dry lab stuff once you at least, once you're hired. You would definitely still do some wet lab stuff, at least the first few years, but I would imagine as you move up within a company, you would do less and less wet lab, spend less time in the wet lab, and you would do more managing of experiments and people and reports and writing and stuff like that. So that's what it seems to me. But I've only been here for a month, so don't take my word too seriously. So yeah, but that's what it seems to me. But yeah.
Yeah. So this was a question someone asked at another event a couple days ago, and I have to say that, with a master's degree, especially from University of Toronto, you can move up to positions that PhDs hold. It may take you extra couple of years, but I know people with master's degrees that now have positions called director of bioinformatics or director of R&D, depending on where they started, right? So usually you start at the bench, and then you gradually work up to managing the team that is now at the bench. You may be training people later on. It's just developing that experience. That's why when you see job descriptions, you'll see a master's with, so many years of experience, maybe 5 years experience, and then a PhD with 2 years of experience, because they're counting the experience. It's really you're developing your scientific thought leadership skills at the same time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So, for those of you that have been in academia for a while, or for those that are used to sort of our diplomas, right, the credentials, the MSc, the PhD, the postdoc, it's like this thing we've had since we were little kids, kindergarten, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like we go to these levels. But once you start working, there are no levels there. Even job titles are very, especially in industry, in academia, we have a specific job title: assistant professor, associate professor. You're climbing up this professorship ladder. But in industry, you can start as research associate or research assistant or senior scientist, junior scientist, data analyst, like whatever that is. But really, you're just working on a project and you're building that experience. So whether Jethro, maybe in 5 years' time, he will be managing a team. If he really likes it, he does it well, and people find him to be a great facilitator, they're going to put him in that role, right? Or maybe he likes the bench work and he wants to stay on the bench. So it's really, once you kind of leave the ivory tower, it's really different in terms of, I guess, what, the degrees and what kind of roles you go into. So don't worry too much about the job title. I had a CEO of a company, he said, I'm starting this company and this is what I want somebody to do. And he was explaining to me everything that he wanted that person to do. And he asked me, what should I call this person? Right? There was no title for it. So really in industry, it's kind of whatever needs to get done that'll make an impact. So yeah. Any more questions for Jethro while he's here?
One question, I think I saw a question about how is it to, I guess, work in the US. I'm a Canadian citizen. So I would say that it's not very complicated. It's a lot of companies when they're hiring from the States, companies in the States hiring from Canada, for example, they more or less treat you as if you're an American, because it's not too hard to just work in the state as a Canadian. So as a Canadian citizen, there's a visa called the TN visa, which is under the NAFTA agreement, and that allows certain specialties to work in the States, and one of them is scientist and biochemist and so on. So all of you, I would imagine, would qualify for that. So if you're a Canadian citizen, it's not hard to work in the States. If you're not a Canadian citizen and you live in Canada, you can still apply, but it is a little bit more complicated, because now you would have to apply for one of the visas you can apply for is an H-1B visa, which is a little bit more competitive than the TN visa. So I think that's what I wanted to answer, because someone asked about the US question. But it's definitely, doable. There's a lot of people who work here who have H-1Bs and O visas and TN. There's a lot of visas. So.
Yeah, so when I worked in the States, I was on a TN visa, so I'm Canadian. I was working in the States for a couple of years. And that was just, we renewed it once a year, and that was fine. I mean, we had the opportunity to apply for a green card and all that, but we decided we'll just do the visa thing. So yes, Jethro is right. I mean, if you're Canadian, and the thing is, you have to make sure in your letter of offer, the job title is related to your discipline. Right? So, for example, your letter of offer should say biochemistry or biochemist. It cannot say product manager or communication analyst or management consultant, right? Because the NAFTA agreement only says it has to be biochemist. Right? So I knew a graduate that got into a little trouble because her letter didn't specifically say biochemistry. So that's just something that for the border, you really have to know, but you have to go through that, the details of the fine-tooth comb. And speaking of that, I had this funny story where a colleague of mine, he got a job in Boston in biotech, and he was all prepared. He had the letter. It said, biochemist working at this company. He had his PhD. His PhD was actually translated from Latin to English so that there would be no problems at the border. He had a copy of his transcripts all ready to go. And then at the border, they looked at his letter, they looked at everything, and they said, well, this says you're a doctorate of philosophy. It didn't say doctorate of chemistry.
Wow.
So he was like, okay, so we need a degree that says you're a scientist. So, long story short, they had to call the manager, and the manager came, and he said, I know that to get this PhD, you need to have a BSc, but some people in this office, they don't know that. So next time, bring your Bachelor of Science degree.
Right.
As well, right? So you just have to make sure you have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed when you cross the border.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, if you need experience to show like 5 years and you're a fresh graduate, should you apply for that job? Oh, so if the job description said you need 5 years and you just graduated, should you apply?
That's a question for me. I don't know. I mean, you can apply. You can apply. It doesn't hurt to apply, but it depends on who's hiring, right? It depends on your resume. It depends if they like you or not. It depends if you have the experience somehow without having, 5 years. It depends on, I don't know. What do you think, Anna? Is that more of a question for you?
The 5 years experience, it could be if you did a 5-year postdoc, right? If your PhD was with an industry partner, that's still 5 years experience, right? Again, and Jethro mentioned just, it depends who's in the pool and what kind of experience you had. I had a student, she did her PhD with Sanofi, so her 5 years was with Sanofi. collaboration with their supervisor. So that's 5 years of experience. So it really depends on your portfolio. Vanessa mentioned, and she said she mentioned you use LinkedIn a lot during your job search. Did you focus on roles that were posted, or did you reach out to people in your roles, companies of interest to network, or both?
Yeah, networking didn't really work for me, unfortunately. So I mostly looked up. So LinkedIn has various tools that helps with specific, like really pinpointing jobs that interest you. So I selected a group of titles that I thought I would work for, like research associate or scientific associate and stuff like that, just titles like that. But I also selected various industries. So whenever a job or position that within that matched those criteria, showed up or was posted on LinkedIn, they would give me a notification and I would check it. But I don't actually know if I actually saw the Generon position on LinkedIn. I think I saw that one actually on Biospace. Biospace is pretty good because it's exclusively biotech and pharma positions. So you don't have to, scroll through like, I don't know, finance positions on Indeed or whatever. So that's good. But yeah, on LinkedIn, I would just look at the description and apply. I guess what I used LinkedIn for though was to basically study what people do, because I really wanted to understand what people do after 10, 15, 20 years after they graduate from graduate school, right? So I would look at various people for fairly ahead in their careers and look and see what they've done, before the position they're at. So I would understand. I would see that some people, some people would graduate with a PhD to postdocs and then work at a company and move to a different company, or some people would do a master's and then stay at a company for like 20 years or whatever. So I would try to study that and see how people like move up their careers. But I didn't really like talk to people at Generon. I actually didn't add anyone from Generon. Actually, I did. Oh yes, one thing I used one way I used LinkedIn was to study, ask questions, and learn how Canadians got into the States. So I basically I looked at people who were working at Amgen or any biotech, pharma companies in the States, but did their schooling in Canada. So I would message those people and ask them how they did that, right? So they would tell me about the TN, or one of them is she actually is at Generon right now, which is cool. So these people, so some of them had a TN visa, some of them were both Canadian and American, so it was a different procedure for them. So so you can definitely use LinkedIn a lot. You can use it as much as you want. I actually would suggest to actually talk to people at companies that you want to work at, but I didn't do that, but I guess I should have. But if you want to do it, you should. Usually most people on LinkedIn, surprisingly, they want to help. Like I would ask questions to a random person on LinkedIn and they would give me detailed answers and where they failed before, which is surprising to me. So a lot of people on LinkedIn are pretty free. So also, I wanted to say that if you want to add me on LinkedIn, you can ask me questions. You can do that too. So, yeah.
So much, Jethro. And, if you wanted to tell everyone here, is there anything that you didn't say or you wanted to say, like one last piece of advice? And while you're doing that, everyone, there is a Google form I sent in the chat if you can fill out that feedback form. And while he's telling us his closing thoughts, next month, we're going to have another coffee chat, if people can see that. That's going to be with Dr. Peng Liang, and he's the Chief Business Officer at BioAge Labs in San Francisco. He's a former healthcare investment banker at CIBC, and that's next Thursday. I would say every third Thursday, we're having these career chats. So the next one is Thursday, November 19th. at 7 to 8, and you'll be able to register the same way you registered for this. So Jethro, any closing thoughts?
This guy seems awesome. But
We'll
yeah,
see you there.
yeah. I would say thank you all for coming. I appreciate your questions. I feel honored to even, I don't know, be questioned. I'm glad that I can help anyone. Like I mentioned, you can add me on LinkedIn if you want. But yeah, the world is your oyster. You can do a lot. You can do a lot in 5 years. People really underestimate what you can do in 5 years. So yeah, thank you.
Jethro, thank you so much for coming in. I love seeing that you've grown, and I remember seeing you the first day of graduate school, and you've just grown professionally, and I love it. I love it. You're awesome.
Awesome. Thank you.